Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Siobhan Reardon. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Auerbach Berger Senior Fellow here with both the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Everyday Places and Spaces. I am extremely excited for the focus of this gathering, which is to extend and deepen the conversation around creating and supporting a parent-centered ecosystem for out-of-school learning. To learn from our colleagues in Charlotte, North Carolina, and their on-the-ground work in establishing informal learning-rich environments. And we will learn from partner learning institutions about what they are doing to increase economically challenged parents' awareness of their role and availability to support children's out-of-school learning and experiences, what it takes to be more accessible, affordable, and welcoming to these families' lessons and the lessons learned. This is our fifth gathering since we launched the Everyday Places and Spaces initiative back in 2001. Following our conversations today, we'll be following up with a survey designed to advise us on the direction of the coalition and the network and all the work that we are continue to do to ensure that children, no matter where children go, they're in a learning rich environment. Two individuals will be leaving their organizations will still remain part of the coalition, but two individuals who have been founding participants in the coalition will be leaving us. Patty Isaacson-Saby will be leaving the Planet Word Museum. She was the founding executive director of the museum and will be heading over to the Detroit Opera as their executive director. And Polly Hart will be leaving Lead to Read KC at the end of the year as well for her next great adventure, as she describes it. We do have three new members to the coalition, and I want to introduce to everyone. Nina Safane is with the Libraries Without Borders, an organization that empowers libraries to reach the communities that need them the most. We have Kate Wells from the Children's Museum of Phoenix, whose mission it is to engage the minds, muscles, and imaginations of children and the grown-ups who care about them. And you'll hear from Kate during our third panel discussion today. And I know Craig Santoro has joined us. Craig Santoro joins us from WHYY in Philadelphia. He is the Director of Educational Programs for our local public radio station here. And we also need to thank and acknowledge a number of supporters of the Everyday Places and Spaces initiative who have helped to launch and encourage our ongoing effort. Carol Auerbach and Al Berger, who have supported the Name Fellowship for the initiative. Harriet and Larry Weiss are also supporters, as well as Ann Friedman. The William Penn Foundation also needs to be acknowledged for their support of the incredible playful learning efforts taking place in Philadelphia with a number of our coalition partners. And we also need to recognize the Vanguard Foundation for their support of the Parents Succeeding initiative that CGL, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, undertook last summer, which has provided us with the outline for the development of the parent-centered ecosystem for out-of-school learning we'll be discussing today. And finally, before we begin our presentations, over the past year, we have been noticing extensive collaborations among our coalition partners that have us truly believing that we are moving from a nascent coalition to a network group of people and organizations aligned to ensure that children are surrounded by learning-rich environments, no matter where they go. For example, my colleague Lisa Hostine and I recently participated in the Free Laundry and Literacy Day hosted by the Laundry Cares Foundation in collaboration with Too Small to Fail and Read by Fourth in Philadelphia. These days enable local residents not only to have their laundry done for free, but families are engaged in any number of literacy-based activities, including being able to bring home brand new books for their bookshelves, as well as their nighttime reading. The Boston Children's Museum and Math Talk continuously work together, and now their latest adventure is how they're building a math trail along the Charles River right on the campus of the Boston Children's Museum. Barbershop Books, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Urban Library Council have aligned to bring an additional 40 additional barbershops into 4 cities in the United States And these initiatives bring not only books for the barbershops, but training the barbershop employees as well on how to continuously support the children and their reading habits. Playful Learning Landscapes, Read by Fourth, Kaboom, and the City of Philadelphia, William Penn Foundation have aligned to bring playful learning rich environments throughout the City of Philadelphia. The Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading in Florida, which supports work in Sarasota, DeSoto, Manatee, and Charlotte counties, have worked with Remake Learning to bring Remake Learning Days to the Suncoast region of Florida. In Omaha, the Omaha Urban Thingscapes has aligned with the Brookings Institution, Playful Learning Landscapes, and Kaboom to develop a citywide effort of playful learning opportunities. And then we have whole citywide initiatives in the city of Milwaukee with their early childhood initiatives, aligning with Too Small to Fail, Laundry Cares, and a number of other organizations to bring playful learning opportunities to WIC centers, hospital and doctor waiting rooms, as well as family courts. And we look forward to seeing all these collaborations and connections expand and grow as we continue to evolve. All right, so now I have the absolute pleasure to introduce our first group of participants, panelists, presenters, and I'll begin with introducing Monroe Richardson. Dr. Monroe Richardson is he is the executive director of Read Charlotte, a community initiative that unites families, educators, and community partners with the goal of improving third grade reading proficiency in Mecklenburg County to 80%. Monroe joined Read Charlotte as the founding executive director in 2015. He has worked in philanthropy for most of the past 25 years. He has received local and national recognition for his efforts at Read Charlotte. Monroe holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Kansas, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa with honors, master's degrees from both Harvard University, where he is a Mellon Fellow, and Oxford University, where he is a Rhodes Scholar, and a PhD from the University of Illinois. Marcellus M.T. Turner, as we like to, M.T., who we like to, his preferred name, I'm going to guess, longtime colleague of mine. Marcellus is the CEO and chief librarian of the Charlotte Mecklenburg County Library. Better known as MT, he's passionate about libraries as both institutions and welcoming spaces for community dialogue, support, and exploration. He has enjoyed a storied career of more than 30 years as a leader in academic and public libraries across the country. MT boasts that he started working in libraries in the 4th grade and has been hooked ever since. Before joining Charlotte Mecklenburg Library in 2021, he was the CEO of the Seattle Public Library. MT earned his master's degree in library science from the University of Tennessee and the bachelor's degree from the Mississippi University for Women. And these gentlemen will be joined by Muffy Grant as the moderator for the panel. Muffy is the executive director of the North Carolina Foundation, Childhood Foundation, excuse me. She joined the foundation in June of 2019. Prior to her role as executive director, she was the director of development at both Prevent Child Abuse and the Institute of Child Success in Greenville, South Carolina. Before making a career change by entering the world of child advocacy in 2015, Muffy spent the previous decade involved in exchange visitor programs in public-private partnership with the Department of State. And so now let me introduce Monroe, and you can take it away, Monroe.
Thanks, Siobhan, and thanks to the campaign for hosting this really important topic and for inviting me today. So I've got some slides I want to share this morning and just sort of walk us through a little bit about a piece of the work that's happening here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and sort of the grounding for that work. But as Siobhan mentioned, we are the local campaign here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and also part of the North Carolina Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation, which Muffy Grant leads, is our state lead. And obviously, it's a privilege to be part of the 13 communities that are part of our state level campaign. So an important part of the work that we do here in Charlotte is help connect evidence-based knowledge with local resources broadly construed to help improve early literacy outcomes from birth through third grade. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Read Together shared reading campaign that we launched earlier this year with about 18 local partners. It, I think, strongly connects with the idea of learning happening in everyday places and spaces. But I first want to ground this in the latest science on early literacy. This image that you see on the screen is the cover of a volume that was published earlier this year, and it's really sort of the cutting edge around what we know and understand about how children learn to read and what we can do as adults to help them. And the very first chapter of this volume introduces a model that's called the direct and indirect effects model of reading, or DEAR, that was both developed and empirically tested by a professor named Young-Suk Kim, who's at the University of California at Irvine. And there's a lot here, but I'm going to quickly sort of ground us for this conversation. And I would imagine there may be some elements of this that sort of undergird a lot of what you're going to hear today. So the goal for all of the work we do, the campaign, all of the efforts that happen with teaching children to read is reading comprehension. It's the ability to make meaning and make sense of text, but hopefully apply what they're learning to make all sorts of decisions, not only as students, but as citizens in our communities and in our country. And what Dr. Kim has found, and what we better understand today than even 20 plus years ago when the National Reading Panel report was produced, is that there really are two pillars that contribute to reading comprehension. There's word reading and there's listening comprehension skills. And these are really the two big drivers of reading comprehension. A lot of what we hear about these days as it relates to, as people refer to the science of reading, has really focused on sort of the phonics instruction and having systematic, well-structured instruction and helping kids to be able to learn to get the words off the page is absolutely vital and important. But what these researchers have found, Dr. Kim and others in other institutions as well, is that as early as second grade, listening comprehension becomes the greatest predictor of reading comprehension. And so it's this other pillar that's also critically important, which is where I think the work that we're doing around shared reading, and I would imagine a lot of the work around learning in everyday spaces, really can play a big and significant role. Now, why is this important? Well, when we think about those two skills, sort of the word reading skills and sort of the listening comprehension skills, word reading skills are what they call a constrained skill. They're fixed, finite, and teachable, and a typically developing child can learn to get the words off the page in 2 to 3 years with good instruction. But listening comprehension skills, which really have two parts, they're sort of the lower level skills, which is vocabulary and grammar, but there's also higher level skills of reasoning, inferencing, comprehension monitoring, and perspective taking. Those are called unconstrained. Those take more time to develop. So, it really starts at birth and begins before kids even start kindergarten. And the gaps that we see in reading show up not only in the word reading skills, but also those listening comprehension skills, which again, take more time to develop. And that's really where this work that we do with helping children be able to learn in everyday spaces really can play a powerful role. Those higher level skills are reasoning, they're inferencing, they're comprehension monitoring, they're perspective taking, and those just take more time to develop and build than the 26 letters of the alphabet and the 44 sounds in English language that we have, that again, with good instruction, really can be delivered in 2 to 3 years for typically developing children. So we know better today that listening comprehension generally precedes reading comprehension. It's a key pathway to reading comprehension, and it's really a bridge between building those word reading skills and helping a child be able to comprehend reading. Why spend time on this? Because this listening comprehension is an important part of teaching children to read. It's oral text. It's things that children are able to hear and understand. And if they can do it orally, they'll be able to do it when they see written text, as long as they have strong decoding skills. In fact, we actually see this in another model that was produced by some researchers from Canada over 20 years ago. This is the home literacy model, and it was developed to show what it is that parents do at home that contribute to reading outcomes by third grade. And all of these elements and all of these lines are statistically significant relationships. And so you can clearly see shared book reading at home and teaching about reading and writing, those contribute to those outcomes at the beginning and end of first grade and ultimately third grade. But I particularly want to highlight language and child book exposure. Those have connections and relationships to end of third grade reading outcomes that both connect with teaching kids how to learn to read words, but also independently make powerful contributions. These are two separately developed models that are both pointing in the same direction. And so that brings us to our Read Together campaign that we are doing here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. It is very intentional, and the goal is to both encourage and equip our families to be able to help support children's listening comprehension skills through more intentional shared reading outside of the school environment. So with the Read Together campaign, what we're trying to do is to really just sort of lower the cognitive barrier and de-romanticize reading. And so we talk about 3 different ways that this could happen. An adult could read to a child, adult could read with a child, or a child could read to you. As my friend and colleague MT will talk about, there's some things that the library and Read Charlotte have done together for years that are really designed to help families know how to effectively read with a child. But we're really trying to encourage more reading with children. And the research tells us 3 times or more a week is really sort of the threshold to have an impact and help build children's early language skills. Now, with that sort of goal of more children experiencing shared reading, there are really sort of 4 areas that we were focused on. The first is knowledge, what to do, why this matters. The second is making sure that families have resources, books, and other supports, really trying to help encourage building the habit of reading, whether it's at nighttime before bed or, in the spaces and places that fit the rhythm of families' lives. And then lastly, identifying with our partners barriers that might be getting in the way of a more shared reading happening outside of the school setting. We're really fortunate to have 18 partners that we are working with in our community. We built this initiative together and we are implementing it together. Really grateful to have MT and all of his colleagues at the library as a key and strong partner. But we also have 17 other partners that are with us that we convene regularly. In fact, our next scheduled meeting is tomorrow morning. There are 2 parts of this effort, what we call the air game, where it's sort of mass messaging across our county, but then also a ground game that happens through our partners where the message and the messenger is really important. One of the things that's a part of our air game is we've got 12 billboards in prime locations, both in English and Spanish, where we're encouraging this very simple message of read together. And as you can see here, through our partnership with the billboard company Adams, like our estimate is from the time we launch it in the spring to the end of December, we'll have more than 99 million impressions, eyeballs, that will have seen these messages. Why does that matter? Because we know more than ever to get through to folks, you've got to have multiple sort of impressions and messages before things sink in. We also have a very active and vigorous social media campaign through multiple channels. And we try to meet folks where they are at and using Google Ads, YouTube, Facebook, multiple ways that we are working to get in front of families and the community here in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. We also equip our partners with toolkits. So we're equipping them with the collateral and resources so that, using within their existing programs and footprints, that we can have sort of a consistent sort of visual imagery and messaging that reinforce those social media messages and billboards that families see around the community. Here are a few examples of some of our partners that that have launched these sort of on-the-ground activities. Again, we're integrating with things that they're already doing, but you can see examples where we're giving them the collateral, where that families are able to see those consistent things. In the bottom left-hand corner is one of our colleagues that delivered an active reading workshop, which MT will talk about, at one of our partners in the northern part of the county earlier this year, a few weeks before school began. But these are all sort of the ways that our partners are integrating this very simple message across their existing programs in our community. 3 months in, we're really pleased with sort of the engagement that we're seeing. As of a few weeks ago, we've got nearly 8 million social media impressions. We've seeing lots of engagement on Facebook. We have a 30-second sort of marketing video, and that's been viewed quite well. We emailed directly to families through Peachjar, and we've seen pretty good email opens on there. And then over 30,000 unique website visitors. That's all local because we're not marketing outside of Charlotte. The other thing that's encouraging is 15% of our visitors viewed the website in Spanish. That's important because that's a growing part of our community is Spanish speaking families and multilingual learners. Last thing I'll just share is, the other part is lifting up stories of what's happening in our community. And this is, we borrowed from our colleagues at Read by Fourth, who's been a great partner over the years. I saw Abby was on. The Reading Hero idea that they allowed us to borrow and import to Charlotte. But a local dad, Camion Martin, who reads to his two young children. And he grew up without his dad being there, and he wanted to do things that he didn't get as a child. And it's a great example that we want to lift up for our community of what this looks like in everyday people and everyday spaces and places in our community. So it's a great example of how we've been able to pull partners together in our community, and excited to hear more from MT and engage in conversation with MT and Muffy.
Thanks, Monroe. You made me want to be taller, so I apologize. I stood up while you were talking. But really glad to be with everyone this morning. Really happy to talk about what libraries are doing. Libraries, as was shared, I've been working in libraries since 4th grade, and if they were only still so simple as they were when I was in 4th grade, but libraries are wonderfully exciting everyday spaces to promote the work that Monroe is talking about, and certainly why we're gathered here today. And our library is no different from any other library. I think we're better than every other library, but we're no different from every other library in what we do. Our everyday spaces means that we're open to everyone every day. All hours we are available, that our staff is here to connect with kids and children, so we're absolutely here. We use those times to engage and connect with children to promote all of the things that Monroe was talking about: reading comprehension, listening comprehension, and access to materials, which helps build readers by having their own library collections. But in addition, we also do work with our caregivers and parents so that we're able to help them learn how to engage and read with their children. It's one thing to be read to, it's another thing to be read with, and then another thing to be read to when it is the kid doing so. And so we want to help our caregivers and parents understand how to do this work. So in addition to the story times that we prepare for our kids, during those times, we're also talking to the parents and caregivers about how to do active reading. But some of the other things that we do is we try to support the kids out of school time. Kids are in school and they're learning everything, and we want that to be a gradual shift to doing more about learning and learning to read and comprehend. But we do it in that out of school time. So when school's out, we're open to students and kids. Weekends, we're open to students and kids. And during those out of school times, we do lots of things. We do vocabulary building when we do the story times. We're teaching them new words, how the words sound, but also what those words mean by looking at the pictures, showing the picture and saying, what do you think this means? So this is what active reading is about, how to engage that kid to understand what they're reading and hearing. But it also plays into the role of listening. As Monroe shared, listening is such a great part of a person's ability to comprehend. And that ability to gather them in a room, to talk to them, to read to them, and have them listen to what we're saying and deduce what is coming out of that is one of the true goals of our story times, teaching them how to read, but also how to listen. So we're really excited about that. The role of libraries in this work is really great. I think where we're at this crossroads is at a shared language where we're trying to understand, is our goal to promote reading or is our goal to promote literacy? And so I know that many will be on both sides of this coin and many will say that we can do both, and we can. It's just one of those things that needs to be a shared language for all of us so that when we meet with our partners, we're also talking to them about, hey, are we trying to develop, do we have a shared language of what our goal is? Are we promoting reading or are we promoting literacy? That being said, I wanted to close out with just a couple of other things that we do. In addition to our support for active reading in story times and other events, we also do this in our student success centers. We have homework help centers built into our program where kids can stop by and they actually get access to three things. They get access to our library resources so that they can help them do work. They also get access to someone who can help them with their homework. But more importantly, if there's a skill or a talent that they want to develop, we allow that as well. So kids who come in wanting to better their reading, or parents who bring their kids in wanting them to become better at reading and reading comprehension, we have volunteers set aside to help them with that specifically. We also have activities where kids can come in and practice their reading outside of the Student Success Center. And they can sit with a volunteer or another teen and be read to, and then in turn read to that teen. So we're always doing this work that supports both reading comprehension and listening comprehension. I'll stop right there because I think the engagement is going to be more important than what I shared. But I just wanted to share with you a couple of things that are occurring at Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MT and Monroe for sharing those great updates with us. I am Muffy Grant. I'm the Executive Director of the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation. We at the foundation take a whole child prenatal through the end of third grade approach to grade level reading. And as we all know, it takes a lot more than a really great second grade teacher to get our children ready for success in life. And we know that third grade reading is certainly a predictor of that. So we focus on the three main domains of early childhood: healthy beginnings, beginning at a healthy birth weight, supported families and communities, and then access to high quality early learning environments with regular attendance. As Monroe stated, we're also the convener for the state's Campaign for Grade Level Reading campaign, which is a huge privilege. And we learned so much about the innovations across 13 communities in our state that have a lot of geographic and resource and demographic diversity. So it's a real privilege to be with you all today, and I can't wait to dig into some of these questions. I'm going to start with you, Monroe. You were talking about listening comprehension as kind of emerging as a key pathway to success, and actually as a better instrument to narrow race and income-based disparities. And so I was just, thinking through that for children. You also were talking about so much of this is happening before kindergarten, and the dial we're trying to move is third grade. But how does this apply to students beyond third grade? There's an urgency in early childhood, and we have cohorts of kids that we care about that are beyond that age demographic.
That's a great question, Muffy. I think one of the things that's interesting about some of this research that's come out is that in the early years, it's certainly going to be those word reading skills that are going to be and in fact be like some of the leading driver of improvement. But all along the way, listening comprehension is there making a contribution. And somewhere around between first and second grade, it shifts in general. And then it's listening comprehension skills, and it's particularly those higher level skills. All the things we think about as reading comprehension are really language-based skills, right? That if you're able to do it orally, you're able to do it in the presence of written text. So reasoning, inferencing, comprehension monitoring, perspective taking. As children get beyond third grade, it really becomes important, and particularly for children that may have the basic word reading skills but are still struggling. It's really likely that it's the listening comprehension skills is both the challenge and opportunity to help lean in and help support those children's reading comprehension skills. But there are multiple challenges with it. It's easier to teach the word reading skills. That's one. Two, we tend to assess that, but not necessarily listening comprehension. And so it's easy to think, oh, it's the word reading skills, and listening comprehension has sort of been there sitting underneath the whole time. So I would say for middle, certainly upper elementary and up, this issue around helping to build children's listening comprehension skills scales all the way up. And it's particularly important for our multilingual learners, which is like a really growing important part of our community, that the research tells us those children, and I think we all have seen this, they can acquire the word reading skills in a few years, but it takes more time to build those listening comprehension skills. And so, again, this is where thinking about the role of libraries and museums and zoos and other spaces that can both help build those sort of language-based skills, but also can build sort of the background knowledge and content discourse knowledge that's important when it comes to reading comprehension as well.
That's really great. Thank you for that. And, Monroe shared an article with us all a couple of days ago, the folks who are presenting on this in this discussion today. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Professor Chetty, but really it's about, the enrichment opportunities that are afforded to high income kids. How do we crack this nut to support closing the achievement gap across the socioeconomic spectrum? And MT, you were discussing, the children in your libraries, but how do we, children that are afforded, high income children, all this enrichment, have a parent at least, or caregiver, or are afforded some sort of child care provider who can ferry them to these places? And that's oftentimes just not an economic reality for kids that are not on the higher end of the economic spectrum. So how do we really bring parents into our everyday places and spaces, while also holding that to be true, that time certainly is money when it comes to those that are not making as much?
Sure. I'll take off first. That's a very good point that we are always challenged with. We have 21 library locations, and even then they're not available to everyone when they need to be or where they are located. Fortunately, we have a strong outreach program with a mobile library named Molly, who goes out into the community to reach these very neighborhoods that are sometimes more challenged economically than our other places. But we do this for many reasons. One, we do that to provide access to the materials and resources that we have available to them. But we also use that as an opportunity to showcase how close they are to one of our area libraries. So we're trying to do everything we can to get out into the neighborhoods to see them. We also do our fair share of marketing to promote story times, to promote all of these events to our communities, partnering with the schools to share this information. But one of our biggest goals is to get out with our mobile library. We also have about 12 librarians who work in our outreach department. 12 is a bit much, maybe about 7 to 8 librarians who go out through our outreach program to do these same services with kids, but also with older kids and adults. So we're trying to move the library out into the community.
That's great. And I know Read Charlotte comes in as such a great resource, using sort of these tentacles of partner organizations to really get information into the community, programming, tools. So what is Read Charlotte doing to help libraries? So how are you joining forces and other organizations to put a greater focus on listening comprehension and understanding how, families and parent centered ecosystem for out of school learning is so critical to success for young kids.
Yes. So one of the things that we're doing is serving, playing a role as someone called a knowledge broker. So really sort of connecting between the research and then how do we help groups sort of implement this. We have this group of 18 partners, and we a couple of months ago began to talk with them about listening comprehension. We've been digging into this since late last year. We're also engaged in conversations with our school district about this, which have been fruitful and productive. But one of the things that we found, Muffy, is that there's two things. One, a lot of the sort of really important work around this has started to get published. We saw papers come out in 2020. We were all engaged in dealing with the global pandemic. So there's a bit of a lag between sort of the current science and what we know as practitioners and sort of absorbed into our work. So we're trying to help with that. We are starting a learning community focused around listening comprehension, and we've got sort of our first meeting with partners. So we've teased about this. We'll have a first meeting in a few weeks. But the other thing is that we could not find sort of a comprehensive resource to help educators and other practitioners like know what this is, what to do. Here's resources, activities. So our team is actively working on curating and organizing information, and our vision is to make all of this like available. And I think part of the question will be we have ideas about how this could help classroom educators, and we want to learn with our partners, including the library, like how might you apply these in out of school settings. So for example, just one very practical example, we know shared reading, interactive shared reading, active reading is important. But what are the steps you should take in a first reading, second reading, third reading, fourth reading? Like we've got a resource that we've pulled together to help practitioners be able to do that. And so I think that's also part of what we can do. And the question is, how does some of this translate out of the, outside of a classroom, in communities, with families? And so this is also something that we want to learn with our partners as well.
Is there anything that you want to add to that about the work that you're doing with Read Charlotte in particular?
Thanks. So, I guess I'd focus more so not just on the question, but focus on the opportunity to partner with it. It's not just libraries carrying this water to try to make this work. It's this joint effort that is being led by Read Charlotte to help magnify the work that libraries are doing, but to also get us all on the same page with a common goal. The city really got behind this effort of Read Charlotte, and that has been the recognition and the support that allows us to be in the right places, be at the right tables to talk about this work and gather together. I know that was sort of off, but I just wanted to not lose that component of what we do.
That's great. And for those of you who have not had the opportunity to read this New York Times article, I think it's important that we share it in the chat, and maybe Monroe can do that now. Folks in Charlotte are familiar with this researcher's work because he was really integral to the creation of Leading on Opportunity, economic opportunity group in Charlotte. Many great programs have been birthed out of that, Read Charlotte, one of them. So, and our MEC pre-K program, which of course is available universally in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County. So with that, if there's anything else, Monroe or MT, that you would like to add to this conversation, or if not, I can hand it over to Siobhan so that we stay on schedule. And I appreciate you both and the work that you do, and look forward to hearing from others in the program. Siobhan?
Well, thank you all. That was a fabulous conversation, and really appreciate all of you and the time and effort you put into having us all sort of feel very strongly. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to the chat, but there's been some very important sort of conversations happening there as well. Before we leave, I just want to invite anybody who has joined us, if you have a question for Monroe, Marcellus, or Muffy, before we move on to our next, and we are remarkably on time, but Muffy, great job, you all three of you. Monroe promised me you would all be right on time, and you've done a fabulous job. But I want to leave an opportunity for somebody to ask a question if need be, and I'm just going to scan through the folks and see if there's a hand raised or a mic have come off. You've stunned this. The silence is stunning, folks.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be a question later. All right.
But Siobhan, there were a few questions, so I'm trying to answer as we
Oh, there you go. Okay.
and
Okay.
put them in the chat as well.
So why don't you respond to it so that if you're seeing a question, Marcellus, that you want to respond to, go ahead.
So there was a question about shared language and shared goals and trying to be on the same page about that. And
Yes.
Siobhan and I were just at a conference where we talked about this, but I always say that if you could put 10 library directors on the same corner and ask them to cross the street at 10 a.m., we'd be doing something really powerful. But that's the challenge of libraries, is that we are trying to do so much to it. I think one of the key elements, though, is as you do these activities, if you're doing a story time, if you're doing a active reading exercise, trying to make sure that the parents and caregivers understand the goals of each, because you don't want them confusing the child. If you're doing story time for a toddler, 3-year-old, you want that parent to understand we're trying to get them to reading comprehension, understanding, hearing the words. As they age a little bit and we move them into other exercises, then we'd be looking at how do we help support listening comprehension, all of the keystones of what Monroe has shared with us. So.
Brilliant. Yep. Great. So I again thank you to all of you. You were fabulous. And so now we're going to move on to the next panel.
Okay. Well, I'm really happy to be here today and thrilled to be in such wonderful company. We have a limited amount of time to express many, many ideas with you. So I'm going to ask permission from Bella and Maria that I not read your whole bios. So what I would like to tell you is that Bella Mote is the president and CEO of the Carol Robertson Center for Learning, is an early childhood and youth development professional who spent her whole career supporting programs at the local, national, and international level. We have Maria Sue with us. She's the director of the San Francisco Department of Children, Youth, and Their Families. It's an innovative policy and grant-making agency and a proud steward of the Children and Youth Fund, a landmark initiative that funds comprehensive services for children, youth, and families in the city and county of San Francisco. And as Ralph has told us, we have a wonderful guest who will be presenting our keynote for today. With us, we have Karen Pittman. For those of you who are familiar with Karen's work, she is a truly knowledgeable, inspirational leader who has a great deal of experience and wisdom to share with us. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you for your keynote presentation, and I'm looking forward to a discussion between the four of us once your keynote is finished.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it really is exciting. See if I can get the slideshow to start. It was really wonderful to hear the opening. It just set it up perfectly to hear the collaboration between the libraries and Charlotte Reads, and it's just wonderful. So I'm going to take about 15 minutes and watch the clock to just sort of talk through some of the research behind the efforts that reinforce the idea that we really do have to build an ecosystem. But it's more than build it. We know ecosystems exist. They just aren't very equitable and they aren't very accessible. So we really need to work on that. So I want to talk about how we could think about getting to equitable, healthy, parent-centered ecosystems for children and what some of the principles are. I'm old, so I start with Bronfenbrenner, who really came up with the idea of this human ecology thinking. And what's so important about his work is that he showed us that when you think about it, children are in the middle. And in his mind, the child has an intimate relationship with their family, with their school or daycare or preschool, with their peers in their neighborhood, with religious organizations, if their parents are a part of that, or a community organization, with their neighborhood and playground. He really named the places and spaces that make up the intimate lives of everyday lives of children. Those places and spaces, of course, are part of the larger exosystem, as he called it, which is where the adults connect into government agencies and social services, the organizations that create those more intimate spaces. But what we're going to talk about today is really that mesosystem, because what was described just now between the partnership between those 19, I think, organizations on the screen is the connection of the people in different organizations and places. The more people connect, the more people are on the same page, the more likely it is that you're going to see continuity between the interactions of those as young people move from one place to the other with their families. And the easier it is for families to really know what's available if the people in those organizations are working together. So we just saw a wonderful example of that. So Bronfenbrenner really helped us lift up this idea that we can change big systems, but we can also enhance young people's experiences by focusing on the microsystem and connecting the adults around them to be more powerful. And again, ecosystems exist, but they're definitely not equitable. The Beta subassembly required work done by Beta, by Bellwether, found that there's almost $200 billion spent every year on supplemental learning activities. And about half of that is spent on actual programming, parents finding programs for their young people to participate in that enhance their learning. And unfortunately, that programming is often fee for service. Even if it's available, it's not affordable or accessible because of transportation and other things, or maybe it isn't appropriate for the age group or the cultural group of the child. But what we know is that the gap between affluent and low income parents is growing. About 10 years ago, was affluent parents spent 4 times as much. Now they spend 7 times as much as low income parents. And so we know this isn't equitable. We don't have to talk about the fact that learning environments often aren't healthy, but they're rarely parent centered, in the sense that they're rarely coming together to really help that parent easily understand what is available to them. And they're not taking responsibility for making sure that parents really can access it, not one organization at a time, but looking at that entire ecosystem. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. Looking beyond family and school, I love this picture. This is not my picture. This is the National League of Cities. They made this picture during the pandemic to really create a visual to say, when schools are closed, other buildings may still be open that parents could use for hotspots, for bringing their children, for coming with their children, for finding adults who understand learning. And this was a very valuable picture to put out there. And so I wanted to just share it. I'm going to come back to it later on, but I just love the image of the fact that we know young people and their families have a one-to-one relationship with a school. You go to one school at a time, but there's no limit to where you can go in the community to places where you've got programming happening for young people, paid and volunteer programming happening for young people and their families, and we need those to be more connected. I'm an adolescent specialist. I know I'm talking to people who are talking about grade level reading for 3rd grade, but my career and background has been in adolescence. But adolescents are part of the developmental process. And the National Research Council just defined adolescence now as 10 to 26. And so in some ways, adolescence picks up right when you all leave off. And if you listen to the podcast I did with Ralph, you know that I'm a fan of thinking about what is the next campaign and what's the hook for the next campaign. Grade level reading was a very intentional hook that Ralph selected and the campaign selected to say everybody can understand the importance of reading. What is the next thing that we need to understand the importance of to make sure that we're getting that learning continuing past 2nd and 3rd grade when you're getting to that literacy, when you're getting to the language skills that you talked about that take longer to develop? How do we get young people involved in continuous meaning making, which happens in adolescence? So we know that in the end, what makes a young adult successful is a broad set of competencies, obviously including literacy and numeracy, but also a strong sense of agency and an integrated identity, an identity of who they are that cuts across those places and spaces where they spend their time, which is why those places and spaces really need to be working together so they're not sending different messages to young people. To do that, young people have to be developing mindsets, values, self-regulation, knowledge, and skills. And the self-regulation skills, as we know, start very early. And so I want to share with you that all this is built on the fact that young people need time to act and reflect. That's what active learning is. It's a combination of having a chance to experience and having a chance to reflect on those experiences. And what I love about what the Chicago Research Council did is that developed this model is that they gave us verbs to really understand what we mean by acting and reflecting. So we can check how we're making sure that young people are doing these things in sufficient quantities. They put out a developmental model, which is important. They started at the end to talk about what young adult success looks like, but they show us what it looks like starting in early childhood, where you're focusing on those basic knowledge and skills like reading and numeracy. You're focusing on self-regulation skills. Can young people manage themselves? Can they work in a group? Can they manage their emotions in very basic ways? And those things don't go away, but we build on them over time. And it's really important that foundation is set. So the Campaign for Grade Level Reading really did select us a very concrete and important milestone in young people's early childhood development. And then we go on from there. The thing that I think is really important as we're thinking about how to do all the things Ralph just said about how do we create an abundant community-wide ecosystem that's ubiquitous, is we have to really understand the importance of asset building. And clearly having a commitment to learning, having positive values, having social competencies, having a positive identity, those things that the Chicago Consortium identified at the end of the game, those are all assets, internal assets that the young person has, but there are external assets that support them. And those external assets are everywhere in their community. And so first of all, we know that young people don't need every asset to survive, but more assets help. The Search Institute did an amazing job of identifying 40 developmental assets, 20 internal, 20 external, and then they started to ask communities to do surveys of the young people to measure them. And what they found was that the average number of assets young people have is 20. Most have between 11 and 30. The other things that they found are really important for us to understand, because they understand not only do assets matter, it's how many they have, not which ones. And in this country, we're so concerned about young people having specific assets, we don't understand the importance of building all of their assets, of giving them multiple assets, almost as a way to have redundancy in the system. You need multiple assets. So the number of assets a teen has is more important than which ones. The number is a strong predictor of both thriving and risky behaviors, and I won't read the data to you, but in both directions, there's a very clear stair-step relationship between the number of assets young people have, internal and external, and whether or not they're doing well, or they're moving in the wrong direction in terms of risky behaviors like alcohol and tobacco use, et cetera. And the Search Institute's work was done on young people sort of 10 to 18. The other thing that's so important when we think about assets is that when they did look at racial and ethnic, they cut the data by race and ethnicity. What they found was that the differences were quite small. The average for white and Asian teens was 21, but the average for Black teens was 20. Latinos 18.6. So you can ask, how can they have similar assets, but have such different academic competencies when we look at the data from an academic perspective? And that's the value of understanding how the opportunities are not in the larger environment, but the assets are there in their more micro environments. And we need then to really reinforce those micro environments to get the people in those more intimate spaces having more ownership of young people's success, because they have that impact. They do have that impact, but they don't really recognize it. And that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out. How do we do that in a campaign to offset the overimportance of school and what happens during the school day? Because school really is a multi-service organization, as Ralph said, to understand how we can increase the aspect, the power of other adults. The protective factor of having one more asset works across the same groups. I could show you a different slide that shows you for every asset built, you see that, and those stair steps happen for all racial and ethnic groups. And unfortunately, the number of assets declines with age rather than increases, opposite of what you would think. So what are the pillars? Those are the principles of adolescent development and child adolescent development. What are the pillars? And we know that in that ecosystem, there are lots of organizations. And I want to focus on the organizations because those organizations are the ones that have the power through their paid staff of really engaging those everyday places and spaces and people in young people's lives. And so what we've done is to say there are lots of organizations, but they come in 4 big chunks. We've got organizations starting with K-12. Obviously, they're not all mandatory, but education is focused on learning and development. And for K-12, education is mandatory. Your kid has to show up someplace or you're in trouble. Those learning organizations that are mandatory are coupled with voluntary organizations in the community that focus on learning and development. Some are age specific, like after school programs. Some are more general, like libraries and museums, but they focus on learning and development. We obviously have basic services, and those basic services, if you're affluent, you pay for them yourself. If you're not affluent, you're getting them through public services. And then we have protection and enforcement. And young people, when they're involved in those systems or their families, are not usually involved voluntarily. They're involved in a mandatory way. So we've got two axes, voluntary and mandatory. And what I want to really focus on today is that top two bars, that mandatory and voluntary, and what the connection needs to be and can be between those two very different quadrants in the learning experience. The SOLD Alliance, the Science of Learning and Development Alliance, which I'm a part of, developed this idea of what happens when learning, how do we optimize learning? Obviously, we know learning is developmental. We know learning is uneven. We know so much about how learning happens and how the brain works and how development happens. It's very individual. So what can we do to support learning? And what they came up with was 5 non-negotiables. When we think about school, we often think about the learning experiences, the knowledge development that's happening, the knowledge transfer. But what they learned is learning starts with positive developmental relationships. If young people don't feel known, they don't feel like they're in an environment that feels safe for them, that they belong in, learning doesn't happen. The brain shuts down. If the brain is in fight, flight, or freeze mode, the learning part of the brain doesn't work well because you're waiting to see what's going to happen. And so we know that we have to focus on positive developmental relationships. We have to focus on that sense of safety and belonging and make sure it's there for each child. And then we bring in the rich learning experiences and the knowledge development. We also know that those learning experiences have to really be intentional about developing the skills and habits and mindsets. So it's not just content development that we often lead with, it's development of using content as sort of the raw material to develop the skills and habits and mindsets that we need. And then obviously we need to make sure that they're integrated support systems, that when young people need things outside of the learning environment, they need healthcare, they need counseling, they need transportation. Those things are made available, that partners have those ways to make that happen. We know that parents and young people need to do this well. And so what we've learned is that we put together 2 playbooks. One, Design Principles for Schools, showing really lots of examples of what it looks like when you do this in a school. But because, as Ralph said, I've committed myself, left my life to the other side of this, we also talk about Design Principles for Community-Based Settings. The thing I want to emphasize in my last minute is that there's often a paradox of false choices, and we saw this during the pandemic. We know that whether we call it learning loss or unfinished learning, we know there's a need to do remediation around foundational skills. We know that we need to address the trauma that happened through isolation, but we often think that we have to do those things, which means we have to reduce the effort that we make in making sure young people have interest-driven opportunities to explore. They have relationship-rich opportunities to build resilience and build routines. This has to be a both-and picture, not an either-or picture. And this was shown very clearly with parents. When even during the pandemic, parents were interviewed about why they valued the after-school settings they were sending their kids to. And they were still connected to them all through the pandemic. 75% of parents were still connected to their after-school programs. What they said was that they want their kids to be exposed to new experiences, et cetera. I won't read those for the sake of time. The surprising thing is that the Learning Heroes study also asked the same questions of teachers. And teachers said the same thing. They value the importance of out-of-school time programs for their flexibility, their ability to do interest-driven learning, their ability to let children work at their own pace and express themselves and celebrate their success. Teachers and parents agree that out-of-school settings are important. So when we go back to this idea of the wheel that the National League of Cities gave us, I'm going to put out a proposition. I'm going to put this proposition out by pointing you to the Office of Organization for Economic and Community Development. They put out 4 scenarios for future of learning. They looked ahead and said, what could learning look like in the future? It could continue to be the same way it is now, relying on academic certificates from accredited institutions. It could go into a completely outsourced mode where diverse forms of private and community alternatives are coming up for learning. We could then think about schools as learning hubs, that they maintain their functions, but shifting from a content space to a competency space allows the recognition of the ecosystem and leveraging resources from other institutions in a more organic way. That's the ecosystem model that we're highlighting today. And then the learn as you go model is AI is here and people could just learn on their computers. They could all drive their own learning themselves. They put out 4 very different scenarios. The one highlighted, the schools as learning hubs, is the one that I think we need to look at. But my proposition to all of you, and I think we've heard this in the beginning, my proposition to all of you, and I'd like to have a discussion about this, is what is the role of organizations that are committed to learning, but are committed to, but are voluntary in their nature. Young people don't have to come to them. What is their role to go beyond measuring success by measuring the progress of the young people who come to them to flipping into measuring the success of all young people? And that means that they have to connect their data, they have to have a shared vision, they have to have shared language, they have to do the kind of partnerships that you saw talked about earlier. So I'm going to stop there, see if that makes sense. And I look forward to the discussion.
It's great. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. You've certainly given us all a lot to think about. Bella, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. Can you talk about a couple of things that you and your organization are doing to improve the learning ecosystem in your area?
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm on Central Time, so I'm not sure what time others are on. But thank you for the opportunity. And Karen, it's nice to reconnect in this way. So Carol Robertson Center is at the essence a direct service community-based organization. We serve children prenatal to age 17. And so we're thinking about a lot of the things that we're discussing here on a daily basis. And I think I'm going to put maybe a finer point on a couple of things that were raised. So because we start so young, and many of our families start with us in our early learning programs, and we have an array of programs, so families have choice and option, because we serve the most marginalized, under-resourced communities in Chicago. It's really, really important for us to ensure that families have agency in the choice, and that we're not doing to them, but we're rather doing with them. And so our children stay with us the first 5 years of their life, and then they many times transition into after school and summer camp programs. And so that, when we think about the relationship with the whole family, that in and of itself allows Carol Robertson Center multiple entry points, because that trust that we've talked about, that importance of relationship, I think it's central to how children learn, but it's also central to how we think about our relationship with a family. They're more likely to engage if that trust is built and there's equity in that relationship, right? We've talked a little bit about the pandemic, and I want to highlight a couple of things that were aha moments for us, because in Karen's visual, there was hey, there are all these other spaces that are open, right, during the pandemic. Guess what? Carol Robertson Center was one of those spaces. We have 3 flagship buildings, and what we learned was while we say we're this connective tissue between the family and the schools, right, or that ecosystem, the fundamental question, are we doing enough, in that space, came to a head for us. So when the children were coming, we were providing their devices, their electronic devices, so that they could learn, because Chicago Public Schools was closed for a good number of days. We had insight into the child's classroom experience, right? And so now it couldn't be transactional. We are literally in the Zoom room with the children and their teachers. And that's very, very different than when you hear directly from the teacher, you hear directly from the child or the family. And what we learned is we had to ask ourselves, when we talk about literacy, when we talk about readiness to read and to learn, are we truly, community-based organizations as well as schools, ready to receive children? And I think that that's a really important question that we need to continue to ask ourselves. And so because we were in that space, the trust deepened with the child, because we were right there on the spot to be able to help and support their learning in the moment and beyond. We're communicating with parents about the child's day and the child's learning. And we're having really important conversations with the schools, right? So an example of that is we had a 2nd grader. We provide breakfast to our kiddos, and we provided breakfast. And this particular child was eating breakfast while their classroom had started. And the 2nd grade teacher told that child to put their breakfast away, that they were in school and they couldn't eat. And so our out of school time director was like, time, they can't learn if they're not if they haven't had a good breakfast. But if that child was in school, that conversation couldn't have been had. So the silver lining for us during the pandemic was, how do you take, right, what we're learning, the communication? It's not difficult for us to get a parent to respond to us because of the relationship. So how do we bridge that communication into school? And we've tried and really put forth a lot of effort to be much more intentional in that connective tissue. So that's one thing that I would say. The other is, I think we have to ask ourselves, if you're a community-based organization that has a significant footprint in terms of delivery, and you know that there are places and spaces in those communities where children are accessing, right, whether it's the laundromat or it's the library, how are you partnering? And I think this view of ecosystem can be quite daunting. What we imagine at Carol Robertson Center, and I don't have a good visual, so if there's any artist on the screen, let me know. But if you think about a stool, and if you think about the child, or the youth being the seat of the stool, there are 3 legs that have to pretty much balance and be in harmony at any one point. If one leg of that stool is not aligned, it starts to become imbalanced. And so the parent is an essential leg of the stool. The community, including the community-based organization like Carol Robertson Center, and then the school. And so what Carol Robertson Center has really tried to say is, we are part of that ecosystem that we're talking about, that second leg of the stool. And what's our responsibility to extend ourselves and be agile to have those relationships, because we can be, again, that connective tissue to promote something that's happening at the local library or at the laundromat. And the third thing that I'll say is, I was really inspired by what Monroe was sharing in terms of the research and the science. We have a community saturation project that a group of funders have come together to focus on language and literacy in the first 5 years of life. We know, and it's in a particular underserved community in Chicago, North Lawndale. What we also know is that our families in that community have multiple children of multiple ages. So now we're talking with our partners and the funders to say, it isn't a hard stop at 5. Let's try to extend that into the youth space, right? And then how does that roll back into the work that we're doing as a community-based organization with our youth? So I'll stop there.
But no, it's really great. And, I think it's true. I saw Maria's head shaking up and down, and mine as well, as you were talking about how families come in a variety of ages with a variety of experiences, and building that ecosystem. You mentioned the laundromats. We do pop-up neighbor through laundry events at the laundromat. And when we go, we make sure that we have partners with us. The health department is there, the food bank comes with us, the library comes with us, so that it isn't just the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, but it's all of these support organizations that have this opportunity that for, the 22 minutes that the clothes are in the washing machine, we have a chance to have a real conversation, not just, throwing information or giving brochures, but being in community and really being able to talk and find out more about the families. We just did our 14,000th load of wash on the Suncoast. So that's been a great way for us to build a little more support. So Maria, I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you're doing and how you're helping to foster this ecosystem.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. I've just learned so many wonderful things, and always so impressed with Karen Pittman. You're my idol. We follow you in San Francisco and greatly appreciate what you've done for the youth workforce system, because we actually use it in building our youth workforce superhighway. So for San Francisco, we are quite fortunate that we actually have dedicated funding. So my conversation here and my part here is to really come and share the really high macro systems level of support, since I represent a city and a county. So in 1991, San Francisco advocates, leaders in our children and youth space, mandated and required our city to create dedicated funding for children, youth, and families. And we started this trend across the country where we created what we called the Children and Youth Fund that was dedicated for children's services. Now, children do not need to decompensate, right? You don't have to go into like the child protective systems. Families do not need to decompensate. They do not need to be in the jail systems or in the mental health systems to have access to these funds. These funds were universal for all children, youth, and families. Over the years, we've built in an equity framework and an equity matrix so that we can say, as we allocate these funds to nonprofit agencies, we want to make sure that all boats are lifted. And so therefore, there are certain populations that need extra lifting, and that's how we're allocating those dollars and those funds. So it's just amazing that we have these levels of dedicated funding for children. We've had this since 1991. At this point in time, literally just last Friday, we closed an RFP. So we now fund in 5-year cycles. So talking about stability for nonprofit agencies so that you have dedicated, committed funds for 5 years. We just closed our RFP that was going to fund for another round of 5-year cycles of grantees, and that the value of that RFP is upwards of $500 million, because we want to make sure that we have resources to support nonprofit agencies. I want to talk about the beauty of this, of city government putting a stake in the ground to support children, youth, and families. So our formula is intentional funding with flexibility in those dollars, plus deep collaboration will get you the outcomes that you want. So when we talk about intentional funding, we're talking about allocations of funds to nonprofit agencies that gives them the highest level of flexibility to use those dollars to serve children, youth, and families. We know and acknowledge that children do not come in these little contained boxes. And so therefore you can't say, well, these dollars are just for after school programming. These dollars are just for, youth development programs. Similar to what Bella was talking about, about the stool, we talk about the daisy wheel, where, at the center, because we're San Francisco, there's a flower, the young person and their family are in the middle, and the petals are all the different services that young people and families have access to, so that we can literally say every door is the right door, similar to your every day, every place, every spaces, because every door is the right door. If a family comes through the door of the child care center or the after school door or the workforce door, it is the door for us to serve that young person and their family. So therefore, flexible funding is crucial. And then collaboration, similar to what Bella was talking about, bringing in the different systems in the city to make sure that we create that comprehensive services for all children, youth, and families. So during the pandemic, we worked very closely with the Department of Public Health and our Child Welfare Department and our Juvenile Justice Departments, so that we can make sure that services were not dropped for young people. And I think most importantly is that government should own that work. We should own the complicated and messy work of aligning our billings and funding back office stuff so that you all, CBOs, nonprofit agencies, do the heavy lifting on the ground. You're not trying to figure out how to bill and provide the service, because once again, if we as a city, we as a system agree that every door is the right door, then funding should not limit that door. And so we have in San Francisco an agreement across all of our sister departments that if a family comes into the door of a CBO that happens to be funded by another department, we will figure out how to ensure that those services will be funded. Building on, once again, the expansion of that system. As we expand that system larger, we talk about bringing in our school district systems, our schools. So one thing that we've done is require an MOU agreement at different levels. On the service level, on the school, so we have CBOs that build an MOU agreement with the school itself. But then on the systems level, we have the funding department, our department, creating an MOU with the school system, the school district. And the district MOU with the city is that in order for you to have access to these services and these funds, you're going to open up your executive leadership table to our CBOs. So when you're making decisions about services for young people, our CBOs have to be at that table. So what we've built is a shared accountability table across the system. So when schools say they need help, CBOs are right there to help, but CBOs are also receiving and getting access into the table that makes the decision-making table.
Yeah.
So another way of building that system.
Yeah, and it's very important. You know, I love the idea of the flower that you talked about. The notion of every door is the right door. I think that's really true, and I believe that relationships between organizations becomes really important, and it's actually. We have found that the more that we can convene people who care about the same things, and the more we can foster relationships between those organizations, it kind of takes some of the burden off of us, that everything doesn't have to come through us, that what we're doing is we're fostering these relationships. And it's one of the things that led us to do Remake Learning Days here on the Suncoast. So it's an opportunity, it's a 10-day festival where any organization can put forth an event where parents and children can have experiential learning something side by side. The Patterson Foundation provides funding for all of the events. We just finished our second year, and in 10 days, we had 278 organizations that worked together to put forth 204 events. And we had more than 25,000 people attend these various events. And not only is the 10-day festival important, but we've managed to have year-round convenings for learning from what happened before, bringing partners together, talking about what we're envisioning for the next year, giving trainings and program content and all kinds of things to make sure that those relationships are in place, so that now people can phone each other with, you know, quick questions because they already know each other. Everything doesn't have to be, you know, in introductions and papers and all kinds of things. We've got an informal network that's being built that I think is really helping the work moving forward. So Bella, we've gotten permission to go a little bit longer, which is great. So I do want to ask you, in creating ecosystems, what are some of the challenges that you continue to face, and what perhaps are some of your innovative solutions for getting around some of the obstacles?
So I think it's a dynamic process, you know, and every challenge has an opportunity attached to it. So, you know, I think, Maria, just hearing how you've created such an equitable way of thinking about the disbursement of funds and support and making sure that the decision table has the right set of stakeholders is very inspiring. I think the reality, right, all of what we're talking about is driven by the commitment and compassion and the promise of people. And sometimes we're not always in alignment, especially if the people are working inside a system, right? And so what we've found is that there are oftentimes culture barriers between how Carol Robertson Center as a community-based organization thinks about family participation and how the school thinks about family participation. Going back to what Karen showed in the slide, what are the mandatory expectations of parent engagement and involvement, and what CBOs do is much more fluid, right? Even thinking about who has access into coming into the buildings and the classrooms. And so I think that sometimes that can hinder the blue sky thinking and the implementation of that blue sky vision. And then I would say, just going back to my earlier comment, I think that we place a lot of focus on making sure that the child is ready, that the youth is ready, that the promise of their potential, right, that they're coming with that promise of potential. I'm not sure we talk enough about who's ready to receive them. And I think that that's something that Carol Robertson Center has been thinking a lot about when any child or youth enters our doors, whether it's in our flagship sites or classrooms in our school, you know, in the schools that we partner with. Are we truly ready to receive them and all of the gifts that they bring? Or do we have some preconceived notion of who we want them to be and how they should function? And I think given the disconnect sometimes, I find that there's a little bit of the blame game that happens on the child and the family, and the burden rests with them instead of the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So Karen, as we are coming to the end of this segment, as you're encouraging all of us to look at and to build, when you talk about a healthy ecosystem, what is it? What is your aspiration for all of the practitioners in this space?
Yeah, this is a great question. So for me, a healthy ecosystem has lots of connections. Whether you're thinking about, if you're looking at the natural environment, a healthy ecosystem has lots of connections between the components. And that means that it has the flexibility and the ability to have compensation, both as the environment changes, but also as situations change. And so the thing that's so important, I think, to your first question to Bella about what are some of the obstacles, we really have a long way to go to get people to understand the multidimensionality of learning compared to how schools define learning and teaching. Because as wonderful as that National League of Cities slide was, if you look at the text around it, they were basically saying all these wonderful organizations can be places where that substitute for schools until schools reopen, because that's where the real learning happens. They're wraparound services. Whereas what we know from learning is rich learning, meaning making happens more in those other places than it does in school. And so everybody's come through school. Everybody says, well, I came through school okay. But we have a real opportunity with so much science to get people to understand the richness of what happens when you've got families thinking about building their kids' competencies and skills and values and focusing on interests. And a study was done, the Populace did a purpose of education study last year, and they found that parents say their number one thing that they want schools to do is to provide courses to their kids based on their interests, to help them build practical skills and relevant skills. And so we've got a lot of consensus around parents, business community, young people themselves about how learning should happen, which does not match how it happens in schools. And it's much more aligned with how it happens in communities. And so we need to come together to call that out.
That's great. Thank you so much. So, you know, Monroe got praised for keeping us on schedule. I guess I'm going to get dinged for putting us a little over, but that's okay. It all balances out. I'm going to turn it back to Siobhan. I want to thank Bella, Karen, Maria. We could talk to you much longer. I have a whole list of questions that we could continue, but hopefully this is just the start of a conversation that will carry on. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of you, Beth, Bella, Karen, and Maria. This was another fantastic panel. Really loved the conversation. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to the chat. It's been very active as well. We are going to take a 15-minute break right now, everybody, and come back at 1 o'clock for our final session, where we'll have Giovanni Ford from NCAD and 3 of our practitioners, the North Carolina Zoo, the Richland Library, and the Phoenix Children's Museum, talking about how they are bringing this around to their level at the very significant practitioner level. So, all right. So we will see you shortly at 1 o'clock. It's actually 17 minutes. Y'all get to go have lunch or come back, get something to drink or bio break. All right. See you soon. Kate, how are you? You're on, yeah, Kate. I see you on mute, so, but I'm fine.
I'm
Good to see you.
actually, funny
Yeah.
enough, after all of that, I'm actually on East Coast time because I had to come to Florida for a family
Oh, my.
situation. So we thought I was going to have to be on at 8 a.m., but
Yeah.
I'm
No,
East
you
Coast,
actually,
so
reasonable time, right? Heather, hey, how are you?
Great, thank you. My mind is just spinning with all these awesome ideas and all this inspiration that I have, and I'm
Yeah, it's been a
resisting
big morning. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been a
it's been
big
great.
morning. Yeah, Linda, hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. This has been a
Good.
wonderful learning experience for
Yeah.
me. Just great information.
Yeah, it's what the coalition is all about, right, Giovanni? Why we're bringing everybody together. Yeah, I just think, yeah, this morning was full. Really was full. I'm going to give people to come back another minute or so, Giovanni, before I introduce the session. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. Why don't we, maybe I'll give it another minute. It's only 1:02. I'm not, what's right about this is I'm not the most punctual person in the world. So for me to be on time, all you have to do is ask Ralph. Yeah. All right. So for everybody rejoining, I did pose a question in chat. I want you to pay attention very much to this next session because we have some fabulous practitioners who are going to engage in a conversation, particularly as to talk about their role within the ecosystem for out-of-school learning. This is a fabulous panel that we have put together. But in the chat box, I've put a question about how you consider what is your role in contributing to attaining the durable impact at scale that Ralph was discussing earlier. All right. All right, so let's begin. Again, I have the privilege of introducing 4 amazing human beings. This has been a day of amazing human beings talking about fabulous work being done in support of our little people and encouraging the, healthy, supportive learning experiences no matter where they go. So this next session is going to be moderated by one of our coalition members, Giovanni Ford, who is the founder and executive director of the Network for the Development of Children of African Descent, or NCAD, which is a family education center, and that was established in 1997 and based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm not going to read Giovanni's entire bio. All of you have received everybody's bios, but this is, we had Giovanni on a previous webinar, and I have to say, Giovanni, during that webinar, there were more people excited about everything you had to say. So I'm excited about the redoing that kind of excitement again in this conversation. But Giovanni has been at the forefront of progressive education in Minnesota, serving as a teacher, trainer, program director, and community organizer. So Giovanni is going to be joined by Linda Kinney. Linda is for the past 20 years, Linda has worked in education at the North Carolina Zoo and is currently the Nature, Play, and Schools program manager. One of the things we like to do is ensure that these institutions have, particularly the zoo, it's been fascinating to see how many zoos have engaged in this playful learning enterprise. North Carolina, of course, is exceptional at it. And so she leads professional development trainings for educators and professionals working with children and youth. You can see Linda's bio in the package we sent. Linda and Giovanni are joined by Heather McHugh, a library professional, colleague of mine, and Heather is the Children and Teen Services Manager at Richland Library in Columbia, South Carolina. And Heather works with staff at all locations to develop plan and coordinate diverse and support diverse programs and initiatives for children, teens, and families in the Richland area. She's a proud early literacy advocate and editor-in-chief for Kids in Print, Richland Library's literary magazine. And then last but absolutely not least is our new coalition member. I want to welcome Kate Wells, not only to the coalition, but to this conversation. Kate is rejoined the Children's Museum of Phoenix in December 2013 as its president and CEO. She leads one of the most loved and visited arts and cultural institutions in Arizona, the whole state, with over 350,000 young children and families visiting each year. And under her leadership, the museum continues to focus on exceptional educational exhibits and programs focused on the unique developmental needs of young children 0 to 10. Giovanni, the floor is yours. Take it away. I'm excited for this conversation. Enjoy.
Well, thank you, Siobhan. And thank you for everyone who is a part of this conversation. I'm Brother Giovanni. I started my career in early childhood education, teaching 4- and 5-year-olds back in 1983. And they have been my greatest teachers, along with community elders. Today's conversation is just, earlier, someone said, my head is reeling. I am filled with humility. It is such an honor to share space and build knowledge together. This conversation is reminding me of something that my mother has said for years. She said, when it comes to our children, their education, when it comes to our community, everything we need is in the house. This conversation is also reminding me, over the past couple of weeks, I've been working with a group of young folks and community organizations down in Memphis, and we're preparing them to do some community level action research. But one of the young folks midway through our session said, you know, we are researchers. We are studying ourselves, studying our friends and our family. We are building knowledge. So research doesn't just happen in these academic towers, but we get to be the authority in our own experience. And so again, it is such an honor to be with everyone producing and building knowledge together, because we have everything that we need, the knowledge, the wisdom, to really understand how to build, support, and sustain a durable ecosystem. And so I'm so excited to learn from our partners about what you're doing to support out of school time learning, community learning, family learning. And Linda, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. Would you mind sharing with us what you all are doing in North Carolina at the zoo?
Oh, I'm happy to. I appreciate the opportunity. A lot of what we are doing within the community and working with after school learning actually stem from our Playful Pedagogy program. And this is our program where we were hoping to connect families, students, kiddos, everyone with the natural world. That was really important to us for helping folks develop that relationship with nature, and also incorporating in that playful learning as well. And so we were looking at the world of play work, community play, as well as a term called Utskole, which is a Scandinavian term, which means outdoor school. And outdoor school was about taking school outdoors and learning from the environment and utilizing the environment, as well as the community at large. So it just grew into this community learning opportunity, the community coming together. And so I just love that idea. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to what y'all are doing, because it is something that's close and dear to my heart. But some of the things that we are doing, we began this Nature Rocks program, which was about getting families to connect with the natural world. And we had the opportunity for one of our first partnering opportunities. We realized you can't do it alone. You have to have a community. You have to come together. And so we were able to partner with some of our local libraries that would provide us with a lot of the literature. We would have readings, and then we would go out and explore with our families. And so it was such a wonderful connection to the families. And so it made us realize at this point too, that it's not just the kiddos, they're very important, but it's about bringing the families in as well as partnering with our communities. So we wanted to expand this program. So we were actually contacted by several 21st century learning centers, and we began working with them, and some of them were very family oriented. So we realized we needed to not become part of that community, but to invest in that community and say, this is a long-term investment. This is just not a week, a day, a year, but this is us being invested in this for the long term, working with this community, having them know that we're a resource, we're there for them. And so that just grew. And so from some of these family-oriented after-school programs, we began working with the Boys and Girls Club. And we've just added 5 or 6 more clubs this year. So that has become a very successful program, and looking at family in a very different way, connecting with those counselors, connecting with the children, and actually connecting with the neighborhoods, because we go into the centers and we try to get to know the neighborhoods as well. And it is about playful learning, being outside, connecting with nature, connecting to one another, connecting with the community. And so a lot of those things that we've been talking about coming out of COVID, where we wanted that social interaction that you can get through play, as well as learning together in a very open and emergent environment. And we've also worked with families with our partnerships for children, these early childhood communities, attending family nights, and having programs where we are working with the parents. We're having trainings and working with the parents, but our play workers are with the children as well. And then we come together, all together, children, families, teachers, and everyone coming together. And we found that training is so important. If it's not, it's not just the families, but with the teachers and with the other adults who are working with children in outdoor environments. We've had them come to us say, gosh, we would love to do a nature play day where we go into the communities that maybe can't come to Kids Zone, our nature play space here at the zoo, but going into the community and providing this opportunity. And they say, we would love to do this, but we don't know how to do this. And so to have that opportunity to say, it's easy, we can give you the tools so that you can do this if this is something that you would like to do. And then finally, we are beginning to share our other outdoor natural properties. We have several around the zoo. And so being able to bring families on hikes and looking for salamanders, or just having a good time in an outdoor environment, having a picnic with them. It's really showed us that when we can partner with these other organizations and partner with our own, we're part of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources here in North Carolina. And so being able to partner with the aquariums, or partner with the Transportation Museum, or partner with the other science museums, we're strong. We have found how we are more successful together, we're stronger together. And this has just made us realize that the one thing that we want to do is to continue to develop these relationships and partnerships within our community, because it helps us reach further and helps deepen the experience that we get to have with the kids and their families.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. I love everything that you've shared. This notion of play, you know, us grown folks, we have forgotten the power of play. As you were sharing, my mind was going back to my 4- and 5-year-old classrooms, right? Learning should be fun. And play is about questioning and inquiry. The other thing that you lifted up, which I think is so important when we're thinking about an ecosystem, you said, we can't do it alone. That community, we need community. As practitioners, our families need other families. Our children need other families. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about literacy, how is literacy a mechanism and tool for building and strengthening an ecosystem of community? So I so appreciate everything that you shared. Heather, you want to share with us what you all are doing?
Thank you so much. Yes, I would love to share. So some things that bubbled up for me for sure. And I think we have made some shifts, as all of our institutions have made, and that were beautifully highlighted in Leela's paper about how we're all shifting and how the pandemic really kind of highlighted that shift. But our community outreach, I do want to speak to that department in our library system. So we have kind of moved away from what we would consider, for this particular team, traditional outreach in the community. So like PTO nights and things like that, we are leaning on our location staff to really take care of that. And so we really think of this team as more of community impact. So what they're really trying to focus on is people that will, and by people, I mean our families that will, no matter what we do, they'll never come into our buildings. So how do we reach them? What can we do? And of course, it means meeting them where they're at. And so they have a few initiatives that are really, really great. They have some childcare centers that they work with very intentionally. We have zip codes that we're really, really focusing on with this work. So they work closely and intensely with these childcare centers with regular visits, with classroom collections, but they do this thing called pop-up at pickup. So that's how they connect with the parents. So when the parents come to pick up, there is the library vehicle. They are handing out books. And one of the things and one of the things I will point out is some small details that I do think make a difference. Our Lori Cook, our head of community outreach, she said, you wouldn't believe the difference that was made when all of a sudden we started having books for the parents. And all of a sudden it was like this different idea, like all of a sudden we were considered, because we do so much, as we should, for our children and our teens, but the parents loved that, like all of a sudden they could pick up a new cookbook, or there were books about religion or romances or, you know, pulp fiction, whatever anybody wanted to read. They were beautiful, they were brand new, and they were waiting along with books for their children. One of the things that we also try to do at this particular initiative, and also at our pop-up preschool, is that we have household items too that parents and families can pick up: laundry detergent, paper towels, paper plates. So that's just an added benefit to engaging with us and getting on the bus. So pop-up at pickup has been really great. And again, it's about that consistency and those relationships. And that's one of the things that I've heard a lot in our meeting today, is that it is about showing up time and again, showing that you're going to be dependable, that you're really committed to doing the work, and also creating these relationships. So another initiative that we do, again, so we had pop-up at pickup, we have pop-up preschool. This happens at housing sites regularly, and we also have a couple of community sites where this is happening. So this means that we bring our big Learn Freely bus So it's not a bookmobile, it's a Learn Freely bus. So you get onto the Learn Freely bus. There, of course, are books, but there are learning stations, there's story time, there's a puppet show. We bring community partners on these sites with us, but it's really, really important, and everything underscores everything else. So the books, if we're focusing on letters, everything is intentionally set up. The activities, the books, the tips for the parents all underscore and support that idea. So that's some of the things that are going on in our community. And of course, we're doing things like we're putting books on laundromats, and we're putting books on the bus, and we have story walks, and we have Read to a Therapy Dog, which is really, really great for building reading fluency. And it's a really fun and engaging way to do that. We also have at our main library, we have our education studio that's now staffed by 3 reading specialists. So these are staff members that have a lot of experience, knowledge, and background and training in multisensory instruction that's similar to Orton Gillingham. So we really started by trying to support learners with learning differences in our community, but if you read the research, you know that multisensory instruction is good for everyone, so we all benefit from it. And one of the things that I do like about our reading specialists that's kind of aligned with our social workers here in the library is that because there's no barriers for getting in to see them. You can make an appointment with them and they will talk to you. You don't have to set up an elaborate IEP meeting, and they will meet with any parent, caregiver, teacher, tutor to give them tools, resources. And we've done a lot of investment in decodable reading, decodable books at all of our locations. So when Monroe Richardson talked a lot about the science of reading, we have been engaged in that in a long time, and we're big believers in that. And so everything that we do across our library system, we really, really try to underscore the science of reading and how important that is, the decoding, but also that listening, which I think is such an important skill. Part of our education studios, we have our pre-literacy classes, and we also have something called Young Geniuses. So again, all this rich learning is happening in the library. But it is good to think about, as we think about these high level things that we've been talking about, these larger programs and these ecosystems, it's sometimes even the details that I think are can really help with learning. So for example, this summer, as part of our summer learning challenge, we gave away Play-Doh, which helps build those muscles that we need to be to hold a pencil and to write. We gave away, it wasn't beach balls, it was inflatable globes. And we also made sure that our customers, our families, our community knew that they could get into our Columbia Museum of Art with free admission as part of our, if you completed it, you could go in. Of course, they have free days, but this is just another way for us to say that this institution is also for you. I think another way that we create this ecosystem is making sure consistently that we show up at all kinds of important cultural celebrations in our community. And again, I'm just going to share like a little detail that I think is really great. At one of our Black History celebrations, we had the sensory bin that had ice cream, and it had cars and things like that. And there was a sheet that went along with it because everything that was in the sensory bin was tied to a Black inventor. It was super simple, but really impactful. We had a lot of kids that walked away with that sheet and were really starting to think about those inventors and wanting to do some research afterwards. So those are some of the things that are happening at Richland Library right now.
That's what's up. I especially love your attention to details. Because sometimes it's the simplest things that have such layered, deep learning opportunities. When you mentioned making sure that the parents had books, right? We focus on the children, but children are connected to families. And when we say our children don't do what we say, they do what we do. And so something as simple as supporting the parents reading is instructional to the children. Because if the children see our parents reading books that are of interest to them, then our children will do the same. So thank you for everything that you shared. I love that. Attention to the details.
Thank you.
And, I grew up in the church, and so one of the things that I heard growing up is don't despise small beginnings. So sometimes the simplest thing, if we pause and really study what is happening as a result of those simple actions, powerful opportunities. Kate, would you mind sharing with us
Hello.
what you got going on in Phoenix at
Well,
the
apparently
Children's Museum?
am I pink to everyone else?